Welcome back to our last segment today of Civil Discourse Now. I'm Mark Small. I'm an attorney in Indianapolis, Indiana. My co-host is Paul Ogden, also an attorney in Indianapolis. Our guest today is Jeff Cox, also an Indianapolis attorney.
Are you detecting a pattern here?
And let me ask Jeff, what kind of law do you practice, Jeff?
I'm a litigator. I'll go to court. I do also general practice. I can do wills. I can represent criminal defendants. I can trusts, estates, eminent domain, all sorts of things.
All right, excellent.
That sounds cool. And you can be contacted through jrcoxlawllc.com. We are shooting this show at Big Hat Books, 6510 Cornell Avenue in Broad Ripple. It's on the north side of Indianapolis. This is just north of 65th Street. Cornell is about 2 blocks east of College Avenue. Cornell runs parallel to the Monon Trail, which is like, they call them green trails now, right?
Or linear.
Linear?
The linear parks.
Linear parks, that's a new one. The Monon Railroad used to run through here. They took it back, that right-of-way, the city did, and they paved
through eminent domain.
Through eminent domain.
Eminent domain?
And so it's kind of cool. And
they're calling it a greenway even though it's paved.
Yeah, and you could put asphalt seal coating down that was green in color if you wanted to, but they didn't do that. They just have black asphalt out there. But Big Hat Books has an excellent variety of books here, one of which is arguably essays by Christopher Hitchens, who I believe is an atheist too. It's supposed to be one of the top 5 New York Times nonfiction for the year. Also here we have on the second floor of the bookstore is a gallery area, and G.C. Lucas Gallery has a showing of various artists up here. There's really neat stuff up here. Some of the artists are Lorraine Sack, Karen Chevalier Smith, and Red Rohal. So if you get a chance, come here to Big Hat Books and look at some of the books. I've got a book, Crime Pays. We're going to be talking about it next week. It's a fictionalized account of a Ponzi scheme in the mid-1960s in Kokomo, Indiana. And we are talking about militarism of the United States worldwide, and we were in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Iraq, and I want to go back to Iraq. The question is, should we have gone in there to depose Saddam Hussein to begin with, and why?
Yes.
And there wasn't, and why?
Yeah.
Which reason?
There are multiple reasons for it, actually. After September 11th, it became apparent that terrorist cells could be delivery vehicles. Yeah, I know they weren't literally vehicles, they're people, but they're, in a sense, delivery vehicles for weapons of mass destruction. If Al-Qaeda had a nuke, they would use it. They would have put on one of those planes somehow and tried it. If they could put it on a container ship, they would have detonated it in New York Harbor or San Francisco or wherever. Saddam Hussein was developing weapons of mass destruction. He admitted it himself. They have actually found stuff that showed he was developing. He didn't have them, but he was developing them. He had all the precursors for them. As soon as the UN sanctions were off, as soon as no one was looking at him, he was going to work on them. He had contacts with every terrorist group in the Middle East, including Al-Qaeda.
I thought he didn't get along with Al-Qaeda.
He did. Yes, he did. Yes, he did. He had representatives of Al-Qaeda in Baghdad. He didn't have a part in September 11th, and no one said that he did. But he did have contact with Al-Qaeda. He was working with Hamas, working with Hezbollah. It's irrational to think
those are different. I
understand that. But it's irrational to think that he'd be working with every terrorist group in the Middle East except for Al-Qaeda.
No, it does make sense.
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it does, because
no, it doesn't.
Hezbollah and Hamas have to do specifically with the Palestinian situation, the Palestinian cause, as it were. Palestine existed there before the mid-1940s, when all of a sudden a lot of Jews fled there because nobody would let them go anyplace else, and they were fleeing Germany. They got to the Middle East and went to Palestine, and thus came the modern state of Israel. And the Arabs who were living there at the time were moved off their land. That's what we've been dealing with for all these years.
I don't
Wait a minute.
They were moved off their land. They moved themselves off their land.
No. There were laws in place. For example, if you were absent from your land, let's say you went to the market, the government, the Israeli government, could take your land and seize it and distribute it to someone else.
Well, that was because the people who left their land did so before the 1947 war on the assumption that the Arab armies would retake Israel. So that they're not being allowed back in, and I can understand that. I mean, you left on your own. You wanted the Israeli government gone. So why should Israel take you back?
No, and this is according to Alfred Lilienthal's book, The Other Side of the Coin. He goes through the history of the way in which Israel would do forfeitures of land, and this was after the war.
So it was after the war.
No, so people were there, and they'd leave to go to market, and their land would be seized. It worked a lot like civil forfeiture today. So Al-Qaeda had different goals than Hezbollah and Hamas. So it would make sense that he would deal with one group because there's strong support in the Arab world for Palestinian rights, whereas Al-Qaeda is completely different. Or not completely different, largely different.
As soon as the U.S. removed its troops from Saudi Arabia, Al-Qaeda took up the Palestinian cause. But that's beside the point. Saddam Hussein had said he had personally declared war on the United States. He hated us. He wanted to attack us. He said he would do it at any chance he could get. And so had Osama bin Laden.
Wait a second. Saddam Hussein was our pal. In the 80s, he was our buddy. We gave him a lot of the precursors for what we said were later weapons of mass destruction.
No, we didn't. The French and the Germans did, we didn't. We gave him other weapons because he was fighting Iran.
And we wanted both sides to be fighting each other so the worldwide price of oil would drop.
And this is a problem, how?
Because people were dying in a war that we shouldn't be fueling war, Jeff. That kind of goes back to the central theme of this show, which is that militarism is kind of bad.
It depends on the war. If you have two nasty countries who want to beat each other up, I have no problem with that. Especially if one of them wants to take out an evil government like Iran, we shouldn't have a problem with that.
Okay, but we took out the evil government early on. My problem,
Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein.
Yeah, in this
My
case.
problem was that we could stay on in Iraq, and we decided to engage in nation building there.
That is a much thornier issue. Now, here's the logic behind it. If we can show that a democracy, and I know, we're not a democracy, we're a republic, but just use the term guardedly. A democracy can work in the Middle East. An Arab democracy, not Iran, because they're Persian. An Arab democracy can work in the Middle East. It could inspire the other countries to get rid of whatever dictatorships they have, like in Syria, like in Egypt, like in Tunisia, Algeria, all these places where we're seeing revolutions pop up, trying to depose some tyrannical governments. They were inspired by Iraq. By what we did in Iraq. And the Iranian Green Movement, similar. The Cedar Movement in Lebanon, similar. What we did in Iraq.
What about people who might have been inspired by what occurred in Iran in 1953 and saw what we did to a government that was self-determined and democratically elected but didn't want to give our oil companies all the favors that we wanted?
Number one, that was a British oil company. But
it was the Seven Sisters.
Number two, Iran is not Arab. It is Persian.
I know, but I'm talking about the region.
They don't care what Persians do. The Persians look down on the Arabs and vice versa. Okay, number three, again, just because we did something in the 1950s doesn't mean our hands should be tied forever.
Okay, that's showing a basic misunderstanding of Middle Eastern thought. Our troops, I remember in the first days of the second war, it's not a war, we've never declared war, and that's in the Constitution. But they were coming back saying, it's amazing. You'll get into an argument with somebody about something, and they're talking about how their families have been having disputes about this thing for 500 years in this town. Those people do 40 or 50 years is a short period of time to them. And what we did in overthrowing governments is very real. So why should they take seriously what we're saying is like, you get a republic or a democratic principled form of government and we'll support you. No, we won't. We didn't before, so they're going to be looking after their self-interests. And then going back to Iraq, 9/11, there was no connection between Iraq and 9/11.
No one ever said there was.
Secondly, there were no weapons of mass destruction found. Even George W. Bush admitted that.
That's funny. There are a number of independent reports done by UN weapons inspectors who say, or U.S. weapons inspectors who said that there were. They found bunkers filled with pesticide, which was to be used for chemical weapons. Bunkers in the middle of the desert, heavily guarded, filled with pesticide. Now, do you mean to tell me Saddam Hussein had a really big bug problem?
I would have to see what those reports were, Jeff, because all I know what the President of the United States said. George W. Bush, who had every reason in the world to say that there were
don't people on your side of the aisle typically say Bush was lying about everything?
Okay, so you missed what I just said, that he had every reason in the world to say there were mass destruction, so he wouldn't look like the idiot that he.
So that was the one time that he didn't lie, according to liberals.
And secondly, it's not my side of the aisle. I don't have a side of the aisle.
He's not even in the building.
I'm up on the roof. I'm out on the veranda. Actually, verandas are on second floors. We're getting into the last part of the show.
Yep.
What we have always done, and we haven't done it the last few segments, or last few shows, is to do like parting shots, 30 seconds on whatever you wanted to just vent about. Jeff is our guest this week. Jeff, go for it.
Obama punted on the Keystone oil pipeline from Canada, saying he wasn't going to deal with it until 2013 after the election, but the Republicans may try and force it down his throat by attaching it to the bill. It's extending unemployment benefits and the payroll tax cuts. Obama's threatening to veto it. This is a battle he cannot win. Delaying the Keystone oil pipeline is inexcusable, and if he vetoes this, he will give the Republicans a big campaign issue.
Time. Paul?
Oh, I'm next. One of the big issues for attorneys we have is that we have too many attorneys. Basically, people coming out of law school and they don't have jobs. We saw this past year another law school apparently that's cropping up, Indiana Tech. And people are going to be incurring six-figure debt to go to this law school. The State Bar Association should do something about this situation.
Keystone Pipeline. It was a great idea to stop it. That's really a terrible source of any type of energy to go. These sands are really toxic. We should be developing alternative forms of energy. This is a fight that President Obama can win. I've been supporting the opposition to that. So there, I fart in your general direction. Your mother was a hamster and your father smells of elderberries. How's that? That's Monty Python.
Yes, I know that's Monty Python.
I'm sorry. This has been Civil Discourse Now. I didn't mean it personally.
That's okay. That's okay.
This is Civil Discourse Now.
You son of a motherless goat.
Thanks for joining us. Join us next week. We'll be talking about Crime Pays, my book. Have a nice week. A counselor for addictions. We've had a marvelous